Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Story number 1, The Minion, written by AC1308. Inspired by word prompt, your boss believes that you are just an incompetent, foolish minion who accidentally thwarts his plans or aids the heroes. Little does he know, you're actually the hero's leader, undercover, to subvert his plans. Paragon eased his way into the room that had been set aside for the Master Blaster subordinate villains. This would have been risky in the extreme, but he had an ace in the hole. Every member of the wrecking crew had been tagged with microscopic tracers, so that his phone would track their every step. The guards were due to sweep this corridor in 3.5 minutes, which was plenty of time for what he needed to do. MacRavage was his preferred target here. The man browsed any number of offline sites, but he couldn't remember a password to save his life, so they were all written on a sheet of paper, sticky-taped to his desk. Booting up the computer, Paragon entered the password rapidly, then navigated to MacRavage's favorite sites. As expected, they provided an interesting viewpoint into the man's psyche. Also, one of the Paragons didn't want to dwell on too long. He disabled the virus scanner, then went from site to site, clicking on every dubious link he found, wincing as he thought about what was going to happen next. When he was finished, with 2.5 minutes to go, he re-engaged the virus scanner and told it to ignore everything that was on the computer. Minions! The bellow echoed through the base, blaring out of every speaker. He glanced around, with a twinge of regret. He decided there wasn't time to dump a load of Master Blaster memes on the base's bulletin board, so he logged off instead. Opening the door into the corridor, he peered out, then ducked through and closed the door behind him. Pulling the thin latex gloves off and stuffing them into his pocket, he started towards the main meeting hall at a run. Master Blaster raised his chin in righteous indignation as he counted his minions. All of his subordinates were in place, projecting eagerness to go out and create havoc in his name. But there were minions missing. What was he paying them for if they couldn't arrive in a timely fashion when summoned? Finally, the last one stumbled in, wheezing and panting. He stumbled through the ranks of Master Blaster's unpowered henchmen and assumed his place. Apologies, sir, he gasped out. I was told you wanted to count the light fittings in the sub-levels of the base, and I got lost. About to bellow at the idiot, or even possibly make an example of him, Master Blaster stopped and barely prevented himself from face-palming. This was exactly what he'd come to expect from Minion number 41, but the man was loyal to an almost embarrassing degree. So Master Blaster kept him on anyway. He wasn't quite sure if he'd ever expected an incompetent minion before. There were those who were venal, and sometimes venial, greedy, treacherous, cowardly, and even more despicable than Master Blaster himself. But they'd all at least been able to do their jobs without screwing up 5 seconds in. However, unlike the other minions, 41 had passed every single loyalty test he'd ever subjected the man to. He was an idiot, but he was Master Blaster's idiot. All right, who did this to him? He asked, raising his voice so that everyone could hear him. Who is responsible? Of course, silence greeted the question. Nobody wanted to be on the wrong side when he had a legitimate grievance. He turned to Minion 41. Who told you to do this? 41 scrunched his face in thought, then shook his head. I'm sorry. I don't remember. Because, of course you don't, Master Blaster sighed. All right then, let's move along. He turned to the huge screen that dominated the meeting hall and hit the remote. For the next heist, we're going to hit the New York Gold Depository. An image of a building in question popped up on the screen, turning once more to face the assembled villains and minions. He kept talking while he clicked the remote again to bring up the plans for the depository. Now the gold is kept in the... Pausing, he frowned as he looked at the slowly widening eyes of the minions and the rapid blinking of the villains. Someone snorted in amusement, but he wasn't quick enough to determine who. What? He asked suspiciously. Had he inadvertently swapped two images in the PowerPoint presentation? Turning, he looked up to the screen. His jaw dropped. Overlaid on the imagery of the blueprints was a pop-up featuring two women and a donkey doing What? Again? Exactly? As he watched, two more pop-ups appeared, bearing even more salacious imagery. One was animated as the wrecking crew watched, transfixed. Throaty moans began to emanate from the high-tech speakers lining the meeting walls. "No!" he blurted. "No, no, 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 no!" Hurriedly, he darted to the podium, where he tried to delete the pop-ups. More crowded onto the screen with every mouse click, until it was covered entirely. And then one bigger one forced its way into the middle. "Your files have been encrypted," it proclaimed. "Send $10 million for the encryption key." A single button appeared under the image of a grinning gremlin holding a bunch of papers over a shredder. On it was marked, "Yes, I'll pay." "What?" he yelped. "Who did this? Who allowed this onto our computer systems?" Minions and villains alike began looking suspiciously at each other. Accusations flew, with a headache beginning to grow behind his eyes. Master Blaster strode from the room. He would find out who had been incautious, and they would pay. Several of the minions drew closer to the big screen, talking quietly amongst themselves. "The boss is pissed," noted Minion 12, a large, muscular man. "Someone's head's gonna roll for this," agreed 21, a vicious-looking woman. "Is that gonna come out of our pay?" asked 33. Paragon, in his guise as 41, stared at him. "You get paid?" They looked at him with pity, then shook their heads and turned away to continue their discussion. None of them saw him slip a thumb drive from his pocket and slide it into the console on the podium. The computer hummed for a second as it automatically downloaded the contents. Then he removed it and meandered away from the screen. The best way to get away with being a mastermind in the shadows, Paragon had long since found, was being the idiot in plain sight. End of story. Story number 2. By the Fire, written because I said so too. The two of them were grimy, with tangled hair, bristling beards, and dirt rubbed into their skin. One was an older man with a perfect set of teeth. He was noticeably short, about 5.5 feet tall and burly. He leaned against his massive backpack, warmed by the fire and sipping his freshly brewed coffee from the battered tin mug with an odd legend. "My heart, New York, never forget," on its side. The other was a younger man who looked like he hadn't been on the road as long. "I've been traveling between the worlds since I was a boy," said the older man, "jumping trains where there were trains to jump, riding other things if trains weren't available, walking a great deal of the time. All the worlds are Earth, just different Earths. Earth with a twist. On one there weren't many humans at all. Prairie dogs seemed to be in charge. Big ones too, riding buffaloes across the prairie. They left me alone, I left them alone." The old man laughed to himself as he stared at the sparks dancing in the night air above the flames. "Most of the Earths I visit are like this one. It's easier that way. There are minor changes, but nothing to make too strange. Sometimes they are a little better, sometimes they're a little worse. In one, they fixed my teeth for free. In another, I got this mug." The old man's expression looked briefly troubled as he glanced down into the flames. He glanced across the fire at the younger man, who was listening, but obviously not believing. He'd heard a lot of bullcrap. You meet a lot of crazy people on the road. "Take this world, for example. A man can lose everything really quick. His wife and daughter in an accident, his job a few weeks after that. Can burn through his savings, can lose his house. There's no safety net in this world. Nothing for a man to rely on. Nothing to keep him from hitting the road." The younger man was suddenly interested. "How did you know that about me?" he asked dully. What else do you know?" "I know you're a good man. a version of you helped me out in another world, picked me up on a cold winter night and paid for a meal and a room. Might have saved my life, might not have. It's hard to tell. Sometimes the gates pop up, sometimes you have to wait a while." The younger man stared across the fire at the old man. He didn't recognize him, had just met him tonight, but what he said had a ring of truth. He used to do all sorts of things. Pick up hitchhikers, give money to the homeless. He had so much at one time, and it was his way of giving back. Now, he had nothing, and nothing left to give. I don't remember you," he replied dully, his eyes stinging only partially from the smoke. "You wouldn't. It was a different you," the old man replied with a smile. "But I remember. I'm here to return the favor. There's a world right next to this one where your wife and daughter survived your accident and so you. There's a gate over there, just beyond the light of the fire, that deeper patch of darkness." The younger man didn't believe, of course. He'd met a lot of crazies on the road, but he turned to look anyway and saw it. A door shaped to a shadow in the night, a floating gateway leading perhaps to somewhere different. Maybe something better. He turned back to the old man to see that both he and his pack had disappeared. All that was left behind was an indentation on the grass and a battered tin mug, still half filled with coffee, sending up a thin trail of steam. That was twisting, forking, and intertwining, before disappearing forever into the cold night air. End of story. The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my video. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. I just quickly want to thank the Tier 5 patrons and channel members: Alithia Barkey, Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholtz, Albarden Guster, Arcadian, Lord Azrakal, and Joachim Backer.